Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Ansley Ankers, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them in the chat or the Q&A box. I will help out with any technical issues, and we will answer questions live at the end of the presentation, but you are welcome to submit questions at any time. Following today's webinar, we will send you an on-demand recording and the link to download the presentation slides. I'll now turn it over to Finch to get us started.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ansley, so much for moderating this for us and putting this webinar on for us today. Everybody, great to have you all on board. And I'm just going to reiterate what Ansley just said. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please just type it into that Q&A box, all right? And at the end, Ansley's going to go back and read some of those, and myself and our special guest, Will Frattini, will go back and we'll answer those, all right? And, of course, everybody can get a recording of this presentation as well as the slides on SlideShare. So today what we're here to talk about is how you can flawlessly improve your sales execution strategy. So Afterburner's got a history of working with sales teams. We've been in business for the last 21 years. We've worked with a ton of sales organizations, and really these sales organizations, for the most part, almost all of them have seen tremendous growth and success after their work with us. And it's interesting when you go back and you talk to these different sales organizations and you say, hey, what is it about the process? What about the model? What about the structure or the rigor that we applied did you like that really led to your success? And everybody kind of comes up with a different thing that they think really was pivotal to helping them achieve a higher level of success. And we're really blessed to have a guest with us here today to share his story and kind of maybe his idea of what he thinks was critical to their team's improvement. Real quick about myself, my name is David Finch Ginsburg. I am a former Air Force F-16 pilot. I also flew the T-38, which is a fighter trainer aircraft. I still fly part-time for the Montana Air National Guard. In fact, I've got to drive up to Great Falls, Montana tomorrow to go fly the C-130 for 2 days, so I'm looking forward to that. Went to the United States Air Force Academy down in Colorado Springs, and I've got 80 combat missions in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Had a chance to serve as an Air Force One advance agent, so I would travel to locations a week or 2 weeks before Air Force One, the entire crew of Air Force One, and of course that guy that sits up in the front there, the President of the United States, travel locations before he did, and I would coordinate with the Secret Service, the FBI, local law enforcement, tons of other agencies. I mean, talk about creating a cross-functional team, right? We would all work together, though, to ensure the safe and effective, efficient arrival for that airplane and for that most valuable cargo. Back in 2010, I actually founded a nonprofit food bank in a little town called Del Rio, Texas, and I'm happy to say that we've provided over 200,000 meals to people in need since then. 4 years ago, I joined a company called Afterburner, and Afterburner is an organization made up of former fighter pilots, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, other elite military professionals. We've worked with over half of the Fortune 500, 85 of the Fortune 100, and we've done a lot of work with the NFL as well, 14 NFL teams, including 2 Super Bowl champions. One of the organizations we've been working with quite a bit recently is an organization that's really on the move, and they are really coming up, and that is an organization called ZoomInfo, who we're co-producing this webinar with today. And we're really lucky to have one of the leaders from ZoomInfo join us today. His name is Will Ace Frattini. I love that. We got to give him a call sign because we work so much together. But Will Frattini, a little bit about Will. He's a manager in new business sales. He's been there a little over 2 years at ZoomInfo. I'll let him toot his own horn here in a second as well, but he's attained greater than 200% of his individual quota in 2016, and 2017 looks like it might even be better than that. He's actually created his own high-performing special operations team. They call themselves the Snipers because they're so good at what they do. He's been leading them since January of 2017, and he has grown his team from 6 personnel all the way up to 14 personnel just this calendar year. And the thing I know he's excited about is he's already attained his annual quota for the entire year back in September. So he's just going to take the rest of the year off, I think. The other thing that did not show up on this slide that I'm surprised about is he's got a new baby girl at home, right? And so the last time I talked with Will, he wasn't getting a whole lot of sleep. So Will, are you wide awake and ready to join us today?
Sure am, Finch. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, it's our privilege to have you on this webinar today. And you know what? Before we get started, Will, do you mind maybe kicking us off and sharing with us, maybe a story about a recent success that you or your team or a member of your team has had there at ZoomInfo?
Yeah, absolutely, Finch. I mean, as you said, we've been very fortunate to have a good year so far already. We've hit our annual goal a little ahead of schedule, and a lot of successes have contributed to that and helping us close on good opportunities. One of the things that's helped us scale success is engaging a process called red teaming that we learned from you guys. Specifically, recently, we've been using Red Team to make sure that we're kind of crafting the most well-thought-through sales processes that help us get wins the most effective way. Team members actually asking each other, have you considered this value proposition here, or have you considered making sure we cover this point there? And that's really helped us start to achieve, like I said, repeatable and scalable success.
I love it. I love it, and I love the red team concept, and that's what we're going to really anchor on today, is to speak about red teaming. But I want to go back to what I said earlier. Every sales team we work with, they kind of go out and they pull a different tool and they find value in it. Will and his team have really dug in and found value in red teaming. Sometimes groups we've worked with have said, hey, we love the debrief, we love that culture where we're continuously learning and improving. Other folks are like, a structured planning process is valuable, but red teaming is something that is very unique and is an excellent tool if used properly. So what I would like to do is, first off, go ahead and talk to you about how a structured, formalized red team should look, and then we'll kind of talk about how that can be, a little bit hybridized or modified to fit your schedule and your team. First off, let's talk about flawless execution. I think some of you have seen the process that we teach, have used the process that we teach, but for those of you that haven't, we teach a process called flawless execution. It's not just a cool saying, it's an actual methodology. It was born and bred in the zero tolerance for error world of combat aviation. It's essentially saying, you know what, we're never good enough. We're never going to settle. We're never going to say, you know what, we're okay as fighter pilots. We're always going to go into everything with the mentality that we've got to get just a little bit better. We've got to get a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, a little bit better at our job every single time. And the way that we did this as fighter pilots, and the way that we teach great companies like ZoomInfo how to do the exact same thing, is through the flawless execution cycle that you see here. It's pretty simple. It's got to be simple. But what it all boils down to is you get together with your team and you plan out your project, your mission that you want to do using a very simple structured planning process. The leader, or the ace, like Will, gets up in front of his team and he briefs the team on what he expects of them. He looks every single person in the eye, identifying who will do what by when to get the job done. And then we go out and we execute that specific project, right? And along the way, we maintain an execution rhythm, ensuring that we don't lose track of what we're trying to accomplish and kind of let it fall back and let everyday life take over the things that we're trying to do. And then finally, after every cycle, whatever it is we're doing, we're going to get back together and we're going to debrief with the sole point of creating lessons learned that we can apply back into the next plan. And you see it's a cycle, right? Plan, brief, execute, and debrief. You do that over and over and over again, and every single time you get better and better. But the process that Will is talking about actually takes place within the planning framework, right, within the planning methodology. And we teach a process called the 6 steps to mission planning. And once again, very simple process. This is the same process that we would use on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. I mean, it's a scalable process that you can really use in any situation. All right, so let's run through this just real fast, the 6 steps to mission planning. The first thing you have to do is determine a mission objective. A mission objective is laser guided in its focus. It is not a mission statement. It's not something like, hey, we're going to be the #1 sales team ever, or we're going to have a lot of fun out there. That's not a mission objective. A mission objective has to meet 4 criteria. It's got to be clear, which means everyone understands. It has to be measurable, right? It has to be achievable, which everyone buys in and says this is something we can do. and it has to be aligned with our organization's goals or strategies, what we call our high-definition destination. Once you've done that, you have to go out and identify the threats, things that stand in the way of you achieving your goal, and then you identify your available resources, the tools that are at your disposal to overcome the threats or help you get to that mission objective. Once you've done all that, you evaluate your lessons learned, which you should be pulling through your culture of debrief, where we're constantly trying to improve and get better. And then, after all of that's done, after you've gone through all of that risk analysis and all that study and that preparation, you finally start to build out your plan, your course of action. And this is a chance to really write down on paper who will do what by when and hold each other accountable to getting that done. Now, the red teaming process is not listed in here, right? The next step is to plan for contingencies, but I like to think of red teaming as like step 5.5 or 5 alpha, if you will, right? Red teaming is a great opportunity to invite in a group of subject matter experts, usually about 3 to 5 people. You sit them down in front of your team. They were not involved in the planning process. And then the leader or the ace will stand up in front of this red team, right? And he or she will say, all right, red team, this is our mission objective. This is what we want to accomplish. Here's the threats that we think will stand in our way. Here's the resources or the tools that we can use to overcome the threats and get to that goal. And here is our plan. Here's how we're going to achieve that objective that we outlined. All right, and then we, as a planning team, as the ace, politely ask this red team to tear it apart. Tell us why our plan is destined to fail. Tell us why it's no good. All right, we would rather find out now in the planning phase where those weak points lie, instead of waiting till we're in the middle of the action, in the middle of our execution cycle, finding out that we didn't plan for something appropriately, and then having to go on the reactive, right? And really increasing the potential of us failing that project. So how do we do that? Well, first off, let me tell you a couple more things about the red team. The red team is not meant to be negative. Red teams are not meant to be negative. When we bring in these outside subject matter experts or whoever it is you want to present to, we don't go into it with that negative attitude where we're defensive against the things that they have to say. Red team inputs are valuable. Red team inputs are something to be cherished. I look forward to red teams. In fact, the longer that a red teamer is providing me with inputs, the stronger and better my plan is going to be. The more detailed they get, the more down in the weeds they get, the better my plan will be. It's an opportunity for me to have an increased likelihood of success, so we should approach these red teaming opportunities with a smile on our face because it's a great resource. These are not intended to be debate sessions. You'll see in a moment that we have to keep our conversation, our communication process very structured and very organized and very rigid in order to facilitate and encourage as much input as possible in the quickest amount of time. You see, our goal is to get the red team into the room and then out of the room as quickly as possible because we want them to enjoy the experience. We want them to come back and be a red team in the future, and we don't want to hold them there and have this big, long debate. And then finally, just recognize red teaming is not an opportunity to push your own personal agendas, right? When we go into a red teaming session, we are going into it with the mentality of how can our team better achieve success, right? How can we as an organization improve by receiving these inputs from this most valuable red team? If you go in there with the right attitude, it's about the team first, we're not in there to debate, and we're going to remain positive, you're going to have a great red team session. Now, before you red team, a couple of tips, a couple of pieces of advice for you. Before you actually put together a red team, you need to identify 3 to 5 individuals. You don't want to go much more than this because then it turns into a really long, drawn-out session. And 1 to 2 is fine, but if you're doing a formalized planning process, we recommend 3 to 5. You know, send them an email invite. Introduce them to the concept and say, hey, I know this sounds a little bit weird, but these fighter pilots, these Navy SEALs, these Green Berets, they use a process called Red Team, and we're going to start using that too. And we want to try it out. So if you can be to this room at this time, we'll keep you there for 15 minutes, and then we'll kick you out, but we want you to be the Red Team, and we'll teach you how to what we mean by Red Team and how to do that then, all right? This is an opportunity to give them that introductory email about what you expect and the time frame for that. You want to prepare the room, and the way I set up for a red team is I'll get my team to the back of the room, or I'll have them all stand up in the back, depending on the size of the room, and I'll set 3 to 5 chairs right in that front row. I'll make sure that there's a writing pad, a piece of paper, and a pen for each person, each one of my red team members, so they can take notes along the way. And then I'll have my ace standing up in front of the room as well, and we'll make sure that we assign 2 scribes also to be up in the front of the room. Now, the reason we have 2 is because when the red team members start throwing in their inputs, it might start to get a little bit fast, and we have to alternate back and forth between who's going to be writing down which piece of information. I like to put poster boards up and have one scribe write one input down, then go on to the next red team member, and the other scribe write that down. All right, but that way we can collect all of that information. So how exactly do you red team? Well, there's really 5 steps in the red teaming process. We'll go through each of these individually, but the very first thing that we have to do as to execute a formalized red team is for the ace to stand up and brief the plan. We'll talk more about that. Once that's done, we do clarifying questions, and then we'll actually get into the formal red team portion of it using very specific communication process and a very specific language. We'll wrap it all up, we'll conclude, and then finally we'll address the criticisms that we have received from that red team. So step 1 of that, brief. We use the brief acronym. We're all military guys, right? So we use acronyms for like everything, and this is no different. The brief, we are going to brief the scenario. Hey, what's the big picture? All right, what are we trying to accomplish? That high definition destination is what we call that. Your organizational strategy, your organizational goals would be in this case. You'd restate your very specific mission objective. You'd identify your threats and resources. And then you'd go through that course of action. What's your execution flow? What are the different steps that need to be taken into account? And then finally, if you've already thought about this, are there any contingencies that you'd like to bring up to the red team as well? Once you've gone through your entire plan, the ace should probably get through this relatively quickly. Then we'll open the floor to clarifying questions. Clarifying questions are not actual inputs to the plan. These are just more along the lines of, I don't understand what that term means. I don't understand what metric you're using. Could you please explain this specific jargon? All right, but we are going to establish very organized rules of engagement, starting with the clarifying questions and going through the red team questions. We're going to use a round robin format. So as the leader, as the ace, I'm going to go in order over and over again. I'm going to start with the person on my left and go from the left all the way to the right, one at a time, seeing if they have any clarifying questions and answering all of their questions as I go. And then finally, when I get to the point where none of them have any additional clarifying questions, then we can move on. But you got to keep it organized. You do not want your red teamers fighting for an opportunity to provide their input. We keep it structured. People like structure, all right, and it's a more efficient process to get their very valuable inputs. Finally, we're going to get to that red team, and we're going to use the language of communication, right? This is an effective communication process. The red team is going to start all of their questions with the phrase, have you considered? All right, because that is a much more polite, much more professional way of saying your plan sucks and here's why. All right, if you as the ace would immediately turn off if somebody started criticizing your plan using negative language like that. But if somebody says, hey, have you considered this? Right, and they provide their inputs to you in that format, then you're probably a little bit more receptive to their inputs. So they're going to say, have you considered? And we're going to still remain in that organized format, right? We're going to go back and forth, left to right. And we're going to keep it organized. And after we get each one of those inputs, we're going to say, have you considered? A scribe will write it down. And the ace must, no matter what, the ace has to respond with thank you. All right, and this is the hardest part for most organizations to get. The ace immediately wants to go on the defensive, right? We want to protect our baby, this plan we've been working on. And they want to go on the defensive. They want to explain, yes, I've considered it, and here's what we thought when we considered it. But we don't have time for that. We're going to say thank you, and we're going to just move on to the next input. We want to collect as many inputs as we can, and then once they're gone, we can decide whether or not we want to keep it. And like I said, along the way, the scribes are actually going to capture those inputs, put them on the board so that we can talk about it later. We're going to go along the line, keeping it very structured, very organized, until we get to the point where there are no additional inputs from the red team. So as you go through, each person says pass, 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 pass. Once you get a whole line of passes, that means you're done. The red team has completed their inputs to your plan. Sometimes your red team, you're going to give them a window. You're going to say, hey, I need you here from 3:30 to 3:45. And you're going to be coming up to that 3:45 point, and they might still have additional inputs. But you, being a good ace and a good leader, are going to say, you know what, we have hit our time limit. I don't want to keep you past what I promised you. I'm going to respect your time, and I'm going to let you guys loose. If you have any additional inputs, please feel free to stick around, but that's the end of the formal red team part. All right, so after we've collected all this input from our red team participants, it's very important for the ace, for the leader of the plan, to show some goodwill and say, hey, red team, thank you so much for your time. You don't know how valuable your inputs were to my team. We're getting so much out of it. We're going to definitely apply some of the things you said, so thank you very much for your time, but you know what, get out of here. All right, don't say it like that, but we do want them to move on because we want to jump right back into wrapping up our planning process. All right, so we politely ask them to get out of the room. Once the red team is gone, now the ace is going to bring his or her team back together. We're all going to huddle back up together. We're going to pull those two poster boards with the scribes. We're going to go through each one of those inputs, and you'll probably have quite a few inputs on your first couple of times planning because you have been planning in a vacuum. You've been planning with groupthink. You've been all kind of thinking along the same lines, and now you're going to have some outside perspective that might poke holes in that groupthink that you had established. So you bring the whole team in, you'll go through each one of these the inputs, and you're going to categorize those inputs in one of three ways. It's an easy acronym to remember, CIA, right? So it's either going to be a contingency. This is something that we probably should put into our contingency plan. This is a what if. What if this happens? What are we going to do about it? Most of the inputs that you receive probably are going to be ignore. I would say around 80 to 85% of most of the inputs I've seen received in a red teaming process have already been considered, and they can be ignored immediately. But the valuable ones that we're really looking for are those ones that we can label with an A. That means we're going to take action on them. That means we're going to apply them into our plan. So we're going to walk through each one of those inputs. We're going to put a big A next to anything that we need to take action on. And we're going to take those and we're going to figure out where in our plan those steps need to take place, or which steps in our plan need to be edited, modified to be able to fit that. So that is really the structured red team process. And if I come into your company, I'm teaching you how to red team. That's how I'm going to teach you how to red team. But I'll tell you what, at Afterburner, we use red teaming all the time, and we don't prepare a room, we don't set out chairs, we don't make it a formal process. Let me give you an example. If I'm going to send an email to a potential client, before I ever hit send on that with just my eyes looking at it, I'm going to take a copy of it, I'm going to send it over to a couple of my coworkers, a couple of my counterparts, and I'm going to put in the subject block red team, right? And then inside, they're going to read that email, and they will respond back to me with their inputs. And the way that they usually write it is HYC, have you considered? And they'll give me 2, maybe 3 different inputs for that email or for the proposal or whatever I'm working on at that time. Now, it's my decision if I want to take their inputs and actually apply them, like if I'm like, wow, that's actually a great idea, I wish I would have caught that, and apply it, or if it's something I've already considered, maybe they don't know the whole scenario and I can just ignore it and move on from there. And even when we're physically together, we can grab somebody walking down the hall and say, hey, do you got 5 minutes for a quick red team? Bring them in and say, here's what we're thinking of doing. Present them with your plan, and they can say, well, have you considered this? Have you considered this? Have you considered this? And then just walk out the room. It doesn't need to be overly formal. You just got to get that outside input so you can break out of that groupthink and out of that planning tunnel that you're in. So with that, that is our formalized academics for the red teaming process. What I'd like to do right now is I'd like to ask Will Frattini from ZoomInfo if he wouldn't mind sharing us a little bit about how you have actually successfully applied red teaming to your team at ZoomInfo.
Yeah, Finch, absolutely. So as I said earlier, we've been fortunate enough to see success often here this year, and we're continuing to scale our team, and we have to put repeatable practices in place. So, having one-on-one meetings with my team hopefully gives catered advice and wisdom to everybody that they can translate to success and wins, but sometimes it's really valuable to take some of the successes on an individual level and scale them out. So one of the AEs on my team and I were having one of our weekly one-on-ones, and we realized together that he wanted to get a little bit better at representing the potential business gain or the business impact of ZoomInfo's value and solutions to our prospective customers. You know, he noticed he had a few deals in his pipeline that had just been stalling, you know, people saying, I get the value, but they weren't buying. And so we wanted to put our heads together, and I actually coached him and said, you know, I think there's an opportunity for you to put together a training for the team that you can lead, and in turn, you'd become an expert at this concept and learn more yourself. So, you know, hopefully focusing on how to teach the team about how to get to a business impact that translates to a purchase a little faster. So account executive goes off. We gave him a very specific deadline to deliver a training on a specific date. You know, that was the mission objective. Had a timeline to get together and have a rough draft of the deck so that he could go through and we could do a red team process. We actually scheduled a time for a couple teammates to join him and I in a room and get together and very plainly and directly be able to go through this exact red team process. And, you know, while we thought together when he had put together his deck that we had a good mission objective and had everything pretty clearly outlined, the red team process really started to pull out a lot of this feedback that Finch has been talking about. You know, some of the things we already had considered and a couple of things we really didn't need to think too hard about. We had kind of heard some good feedback, but, you know, knew we could ignore it. But specifically through that red team process, we actually figured out that there were a couple really key points you could focus on. You know, one, that realized the training was more classroom training and not very interactive, which nobody likes to be a part of meetings that are just preachy meetings, right? And number two, which is pretty awesome, there was a pretty centralized point that we could focus the training on, which turned into a training on active listening. You know, instead of talking about how we should be closing more deals and representing business impacts, the training turned into one about active listening. And so he went back and took that feedback, restructured his deck. It was less preachy, less classroom training, less you should do this messaging. He made it a lot more interactive, empowered actually a few other team members to be a part of the training with him, which included more prompts for involvement, for questions, and it really resulted in a really phenomenally interactive training that the team loved and kind of very openly commented him after the fact that they really were super thankful to be a part of it. And it's this kind of process that's going to help us translate into, you know, obviously what our goals are, more effective revenue generation in a repeatable, scalable way, so that we can continue to grow and exceed our quota and, you know, not take the rest of the year off Finch, right? You know, be able to continue to press forward, upwards and onwards.
I like it. I like it. I like the idea of taking the rest of the year off, but I understand you're too hard a worker for that. Let me ask you a couple of questions, just as I'm thinking of them off the top of my head here. So this sounded like it was relatively structured, the way that you guys ran your red team, but the way I just described it, did you modify it a little bit more to fit your needs than the way I described it? What did you do?
Well, you know, to have 5 people from it was then 12-person team, we've just added our 13th and 14th, so to take 5 people off the floor, plus 2 other scribes, you know, we knew we needed to adapt a little bit there. So we had, you know, 2 red teamers and a scribe to be able to, you know, finish the red team on the spot or finish the actual project on the spot right after the red team. You know, we're all sales folks. We had to get back on the phones after our red team meeting, so we actually put together a time to finish taking the feedback and putting it to practice. You know, and we were able to kind of own the process being exactly what it was, but, you know, not having to make it exactly rigorous. You know, every single thing has to be exactly as the academics say. But you know, to that point, I mean, we certainly used the have you considered exactly as you talked about, which was awesome. You know, being able to have the very, very candid feedback. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? That's what helped us get to such a successful training, because we weren't afraid to be honest with each other. So.
Now, was it, I've met most of the guys on your team and gals, but I will say a lot of companies we work with really struggle initially with the have you considered language. Did you notice anybody in your team struggle with it? Was it something that they adapted to and were comfortable with pretty quick?
It happened faster than maybe to be expected, which is good. But the first couple times, it definitely is hard to not, you know, for the ace of the mission to not try to push back or over-explain. But because we actually briefed what the red team was ahead of time, that helped set and manage expectations that it was a safe place, and feedback was only meant to assist and improve instead of criticize. So.
Got it. Got it. Well, so can you directly tie maybe some of your sales success? I mean, I know that he was doing some training for you. Can you attribute some future success that you had to that specific training and some of the inputs that he provided to the team?
Absolutely. Right within a week of that training, we closed one of the bigger deals our team has closed all year, thanks to active listening. So we were able to use this red teaming concept from that training that we talked about, or the training concept that we did in the training session, but red teaming in general to actually make sure that we have everything covered. And have you considered statements when we're actually working on a deal? We had a deal with someone that it was an evaluation for a sales team using ZoomInfo, considering using us as a prospecting solution, for the individual sales folks. One of us had pointed out, have you considered there's actually something else they're asking us about? They were asking us some questions about a competitor that just didn't seem to line up with the evaluation they were doing. But by using a loose-termed red team and saying, have you considered asking the prospect why they're asking us these questions about our competitor, we uncovered a whole huge new opportunity within the deal that actually doubled the deal size and actually got us to a win that the whole company was really proud of and really happy about. So absolutely.
That's great news. So you are using an informal type of red team, and when you're using that, just those quick inputs, is it mostly just like face-to-face? Hey, I got my entire team in the bullpen. We look at each other and say, hey, one of them will say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, and then they do a quick red team. Are you doing it via email, or what have you seen work best for your team?
Different scenarios work better with different ways. I mean, as you talked about with your team, with the email red teaming, obviously that's over email. We do that too, but when it comes to red teaming situations and scenarios, we're all close to each other for a reason on the floor. So exactly as you just described, being able to sit down and address each other and ask those questions, face to face, is also what works for us too.
Gotcha. And one of the things I didn't mention in the academics though is this is actually, it's a great process, right? And it helps you uncover some of those hidden opportunities. But I also like to think that it's maybe a change agent as well. It's a cultural change tool. And I don't know, you had a pretty high-performing team really before we were introduced to you guys. Have you seen a change in the culture or maybe a change in the teamwork environment on your team since you've started using this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're very fortunate to have a good group of collaborative folks already, but being able to be a little more formalized and a little more calculated has certainly helped us see even a bit more of an uptick in success since we've started putting this in place. And folks have taken ownership of it without me needing to even be involved, which is obviously the goal. Red teaming with each other without me even knowing it, which is great.
Awesome. All right. Well, Will, thank you for sharing that story. And I love working with your team. It's been a fantastic opportunity to work with ZoomInfo, who is really just growing through the roof right now. So everybody that's listening right now, if you've got any questions for myself or for Will, make sure you get those into the chat box, the Q&A box for Ansley. Ansley, I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to you to get us started. Do you have anything ready to go?
Yes, we do. Thank you. And as Finch mentioned, the chat and Q&A box, we'll monitor both of those. We have a couple right here. Our first one is, how do you address the negative comments when they come up during red teaming?
So I'm assuming, and Will, I'll jump in here and then maybe you can provide input too, but I'm assuming what they mean by that question is negative comments from the red team, right? And I'll tell you what, I'm happy to get negative comments from a red team. You have to, as a leader, as a member of the planning team, you really have to do a mind shift change here. You got to just shift, and you got to recognize any input is a good input, right? Because it's either validating something you've already thought about, or it's bringing up a topic you haven't even considered yet. So if I get negative inputs from a red team, it's probably indicative of that we missed something on our team. So regardless of if it's a positive input or a negative input or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to treat it the exact same way, and I'm going to answer it the exact same way. I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to have a big smile on my face. We're going to write it down, and then we're going to talk about it once the red team's out of the room. Will, do you have anything you want to add on to that one?
No, I think you nailed it, Finch. I think just the only thing to add there is, as you've said, I mean, you just have to make sure you manage expectations that it's a safe place, and it's very important that folks adhere to the format. You frame your question with, have you considered? Even the most negative piece of feedback, when it's said with those few words at the beginning, will come across as, constructive intent as opposed to negative and critical.
Totally agree. All right, Ansley, what else you got?
Is your red team always made up of the same people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So red teaming was invented by the Army over 100 years ago. This is not a new concept in the military. We use it all the time in every single branch. In fact, the Army actually has a job code for a professional red team. All right, so they have a professional red team that goes around base to base and red teams various plans. Right? I would recommend that you don't have the same red team every single time. I would recommend you go out and you find stakeholders, someone with some buy-in, some skin in the game. I would recommend you think outside of your team, right? So if you're a sales team and you're talking about doing a sales initiative, I bring in marketing to participate in that session so that they can provide input from an outside perspective, or I bring in HR if you're talking about personnel things. But I would try to mix it up because you're always going to be getting different new inputs, dependent on where you're going. Will, have you guys used other members of the organization on any of your red teaming opportunities yet, or has it really just been kind of internal to sales at this point?
Just sales so far.
Okay, well, there's your challenge, Will. On the next round, you got to go out and bring marketing in. You got to bring in some HR folks for your next red team. How's that sound?
I'll take it. Challenge accepted.
Awesome. All right, Anthony, what else?
Does the red team have to be all together in the same room?
No, absolutely not. Like we just talked about, you can red team via email, you can red team over the phone. But if you're going to do a structured one, it is kind of nice to have them in the room, especially if they're new to the concept and you got to teach them the academics. It's nice to have, but it's not a need to have. All right, so you can, I did a red team 2 weeks ago down in Dallas, and we had 2 members of the red team join via WebEx, just like this, teleconference, right? And so they listened to the plan, they listened to the academics, and they did just fine on the red team inputs. We gained great valuable information from them, and I don't feel like that they necessarily missed out that much. So no, you do not have to have them in the room.
Does the red team only identify possible problems with the plan, or should they be giving positive comments as well?
Don't take this the wrong way. We don't have time for your positive comments, all right? Red team is a valuable resource. We want you to come in there and provide us with, you have to identify why our plan is going to fail. So inherently that's kind of more negative, right? I love a pat on the back as much as the next guy, but man, we want those inputs about why the plan's going to fall off, why the wheels are going to come off the bus. Get us those inputs quick so we can get you out of the room and we can continue planning. What do you think on that one, Will? You agree with me on that, or do you? Okay.
I agree, and I think, again, the kind of concept of being able to just ask questions in a safe space of have you considered X. Sometimes something that isn't meant to be a compliment can be a very positive piece of feedback. In the example we talked about, the feedback we got was, have you considered that your whole training should be about active listening instead of talking about how to show business impact? And it wasn't meant to be critical. It was meant to be, helpful, but it actually helped us realize what the whole training was supposed to be about in the first place. So again, you can certainly give more positively inclined feedback, but the goal isn't to say, good job, have you considered you did a good job, like Finch said.
Thank you.
How long should the red teaming last?
I like about 15 minutes, no more than 30 minutes. So once again, being on a red team is a lot of fun. So if you're listening to this, you've never been on a red team, you got to figure out how to get it into your culture, get it into your organization, because I love being on a red team. It's a blast. You get to provide quick inputs, and then you get to walk away knowing that you're helping that team to be more effective. So I would say 15 to 30 minutes max in a structured format, right? But just like the way Will has talked about how they use it, in their bullpen there, you know, at ZoomInfo headquarters out there in Waltham, they probably just turn around and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What inputs do you have for me? And that takes like no time at all. But I would put an end limit on it if you're going to use it in a structured format. And when I hit that time limit, the exact way I talked about it earlier, you hit that time limit and you say, guys, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your inputs. If you don't have anything else going on and you want to stick around and provide us with a little bit more help, we'd love to have you, but you guys are cleared off. Okay. Anything else there, Ansley?
Yep, we have a couple more questions. Can the red team happen more than once per plan?
Oh, I'll bounce it over to Will. Will, what do you think? Would you use a red team more frequently when you're going through a planning process?
On the same execution, like the same mission?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I understand the question the right way.
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying, is they're saying, hey, on each mission or each project, or, you know, when you're dealing with each client, are there opportunities for more than one red team, or are you just going to use it the one time? What do you think?
I think so. I think, again, though, remember that slide about the CIA, right? I mean, the purpose of a red team isn't to make you second guess yourself, right? It's to shirk the accountability of executing the mission, right? It's just to point out, you know, at critical points, okay, what haven't we considered here in our next step, you know, deliverable that we're going to go execute, right? So I think, sure, I mean, if there are certain milestones that you need to execute as part of a bigger whole, then definitely. But, you know, I think it's very important that we don't turn into, you know, a whole bunch of, well, can you read this email for me? Because I don't think I wrote it the right way in the first place, right? You know, and that's not productive. So I don't know if you feel the same way or not, Finch.
Yeah, I'm right with you. I think it would be okay to do it a couple of times, especially if you have major changes after that first one. The other thing, Ansley, that I've seen recently is a couple of teams have actually gone through the entire planning process, and when they're building out that course of action, they're including somewhere throughout the execution phase another round of red teaming, right? So they might have a specific mission they're trying to accomplish 3 months down the road, and they say, you know what, at the 2-month point, let's get our champion and maybe a couple of other shareholders in the room, people that have skin in the game, and let's brief them up on the things we've done so far and where we're going, and we'll request their inputs right then. So they're kind of doing like a mid-mission red team as well. And I think that red teaming is really great because you can use it almost anywhere. And so I would encourage you, really, you got to use it at least once, but there are opportunities to use it more than that.
Great, thanks. And we have one last question before our time is up. It's, instead of saying just thank you, can we ask questions to the red team if we have any of them?
So the whole reason for thank you is to avoid getting into the discussion big dialogue. Sometimes, though, a red teamer is going to ask you a very detailed question, and maybe you don't understand what exactly they're saying. And I would encourage you as the leader to make that judgment call and just say, you know what, I don't understand. Can you clarify your question, or maybe you restate it so I get the input written down the right way? And that's about the only time I would do that. I would never have a rebuttal. I would never debate. I would never try to justify anything else I've done in my plan. So, Will, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one, or are we good?
No, I think we're good there.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, everybody that's on the call, everybody that joined the WebEx here today, I just want to thank you guys so much for joining us, and I want to thank our guest, Will, for joining us as well. Will, I know you're a busy guy, right? You got a lot going on. So it means a lot to me that you joined us today. You know what, if you guys are looking to join B2B sales professionals like Will, who rely on ZoomInfo to access like direct dial phone numbers, email addresses, you know, essential prospecting information, and this is what blows my mind, they have a database of over 200 million professionals. Will, are you kidding me? 200 million? That's serious?
I think it's actually up higher than that now, too. We add about 20 million every single week.
Dang, man. All right, so 200 million. They got 200 million professionals and 13 million companies. You need to reach out and contact ZoomInfo today. Probably the best way to get a hold of them, other than to just call Will at home, is zoominfo.com. Get on their website. Check them out. I know we at Afterburner use them. We love partnering with them. And then on behalf of Afterburner, if you want to listen to any of our other webinars, we've got them all recorded. They're at this website here, afterburner.com, webinars. There's a wealth of information available to you there. And you can also sign up for our monthly webinar registration period. And, you know, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Will Fertini, on behalf of Ansley Anchors, our amazing producer who runs this entire thing, and she does an awesome job, and she's also a good friend of mine, we just want to say thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us, and happy hunting as you go out on the rest of your month here in October.